I found a letter in my dead husband's closet, and by the time I finished reading it, I knew a 9-year-old boy I had never met was about to inherit half of everything my children and I had left. My husband had been in the ground for 3 weeks, and he was still keeping secrets from me. My name is Marisol, and this is the story of how I found out my marriage had a locked room in it the whole time, and how the key to that room was a little boy named Theo who had no idea his whole world was about to change either. Let me back up. My husband's name was Julian. We were married for 16 years. We met in our 20s, back when everything felt like it had all the time in the world attached to it. Julian was an engineer, the kind of man who fixed things before you even noticed they were broken. He remembered how I liked my coffee. He remembered our anniversary without a reminder on his phone. He coached our son's baseball team on Saturdays and drove our daughter to dance rehearsals on Tuesdays. And if you had asked anyone in our town to describe the picture of a solid, dependable husband, half of them would have described Julian without even meaning to. We have 2 kids. Our daughter, Camila, is 14. She has Julian's stubborn chin and my temper, which honestly terrifies me some days. Our son, Adrian, is 10, quieter, the kind of kid who watches everything and says very little, and processes it all later, usually at bedtime, in ways that break my heart. 3 weeks ago, Julian was driving home from a job site when another car ran a light. He didn't make it. I got the phone call at 6:47 in the evening, and I remember exactly what I was doing, because normal moments become landmarks when tragedy cuts a line straight through the middle of your life. I was making dinner, spaghetti. I still can't eat spaghetti. The funeral was the kind of funeral where you find out how many people loved someone because they show up in numbers you didn't expect. Coworkers, old college friends, neighbors who barely spoke to Julian beyond a wave. His mother, Odette, sat in the front row next to me, holding my hand so tightly I thought she might crush it, telling me over and over that Julian was a good man, that he loved his family more than anything, that I needed to lean on her, that we were family, that she would help me through this. I believed every word of it. Why wouldn't I? Grief doesn't leave room for suspicion. Grief just leaves room for grief. About 2 weeks after the funeral, I finally made myself go into our bedroom closet to start sorting through his things. It's one of those tasks nobody prepares you for, deciding which of your dead husband's flannel shirts smell enough like him that you can't throw them away yet. I was going through the top shelf, behind his old work boots, when I found a shoebox I didn't recognize. Not a shoebox with shoes in it. A box he'd clearly hidden, tucked behind a stack of sweaters he never wore anymore, in a spot where I'd have no reason to look unless I was doing exactly what I was doing. Inside, there was a folded letter, handwritten, dated almost 10 years ago. There was also a photograph. A woman I didn't recognize, holding a baby. I want to be honest about something, because if I'm not honest here, none of the rest of this story makes sense. 10 years ago, Julian and I went through something terrible. We lost a baby, late in a pregnancy we thought was finally going to work out after 2 miscarriages before that. I fell apart in a way I'm still not sure I've fully recovered from. And Julian, instead of falling apart with me, pulled away. He started working longer hours. He started sleeping in the guest room so I could rest better. We barely spoke for almost a year. I always assumed it was grief making him distant. I never once assumed it was something else entirely. The letter explained something else entirely. It was written by a woman named Renata. In it, she told Julian that she understood he had chosen to stay with his family, that she wasn't going to make trouble, but that their son deserved to know who his father was one day, whenever Julian felt ready to tell him. She thanked Julian for the money he'd been sending. She said she hoped, someday, the 2 families could exist in the same world without anyone getting hurt. I sat on our bedroom floor and read that letter 4 times before the words actually landed. My husband had a son the same age as our own son. Born during the worst year of my life, while I was mourning a baby we lost, my husband was starting an entirely different family with someone else, in secret, and then coming home to sleep in our guest room like the tired, grieving husband I thought he was. I didn't call anyone that night. I just sat there on the floor of our closet, holding a letter from a woman I'd never met, staring at a photo of a baby who would now be about 9 years old, and trying to figure out how a person can share 16 years of their life with someone and still have an entire hidden room they never once let you walk into. The next morning, I did what any reasonable person would do. I called Julian's lawyer, the one who'd handled our wills. I needed to understand what this meant, legally, not just emotionally. I wasn't ready for the answer. The lawyer, a careful, soft-spoken woman named Priscilla, confirmed something I hadn't even thought to ask about. In our state, a child born outside a marriage still has full inheritance rights to a deceased parent's estate, as long as paternity can be established, regardless of whether that parent ever formally acknowledged the child in life. Julian hadn't left a new will accounting for this. He'd never updated anything. Which meant, under the law, his estate, our house, our savings, the small rental property we'd bought as an investment would be divided as though Theo, this boy I'd never heard of until 3 weeks after his father died, was Julian's third child in every legal sense that mattered. I remember asking Priscilla to repeat that sentence, because some part of me was hoping I'd misheard it. I hadn't. I told myself, in that first week, that I could handle this like an adult. That whatever Julian had done, this boy Theo was innocent. He didn't ask to be born into a secret. He didn't ask for his father to die before he ever got the chance to know him properly. I decided I would try to be reasonable. I would reach out to Renata directly, before lawyers turned this into a war, and see if we could handle things like two grown women who'd both loved and been hurt by the same complicated man. I found Renata's number written on the back of an old photograph tucked in the letter. My hands were shaking so hard I had to dial twice. When she picked up, her voice was calm, almost like she'd been waiting for this call for years. Like some part of her always knew this day would eventually come. I told her who I was. There was a long pause on the line, and then she said, quietly, "I always figured I'd hear from you eventually. I just didn't think it would be like this." We talked for almost an hour. She told me things I didn't want to know and couldn't stop listening to. That Julian had been sending money every month for 9 years, quietly, from an account I never had access to. One I now realized must have been the equipment fund for his contracting side work that never seemed to have much in it. That he visited twice a year, always on business trips I remembered clearly, trips I now had to mentally rewrite. That Theo believed his father was a man who traveled a lot for work and loved him very much but couldn't be around as often as he wanted. I asked her the question that had been sitting in my throat like a stone. Did Julian ever plan to tell me? She said, "He told me he was going to. Every year he said this was the year." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't think he ever found the courage. I think some part of him just hoped it would sort itself out eventually. I'm sorry. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you. I loved him too, in whatever broken way that was possible." I hung up feeling something I hadn't expected. Not just rage. Something closer to grief stacked on top of grief, like the ground kept dropping out from under me in stages. I decided to try, in good faith, to work something out with Renata directly, quietly, before it became a legal battle that would hurt everyone, especially the children mine and, whether I liked it or not, hers. That good faith did not last long. Within a week, Renata retained her own attorney, a sharp, aggressive man named Grant Pellerin, who specialized in what he called paternity and inheritance disputes, which told me everything about how common this exact situation apparently was. Grant's first letter to my lawyer wasn't a conversation starter. It was a demand. He argued that Theo, as Julian's biological son, was entitled not just to his legal share of the estate, but to a portion of the life insurance payout as well, even though I was the named beneficiary, on the grounds that Julian had expressed clear intent to provide for Theo, as evidenced by 9 years of financial support. I tried to explain to Priscilla that I wasn't trying to shut this child out of what the law said he deserved. I told her I understood he had rights. What I couldn't stomach was watching a lawyer I'd never met try to argue that my children's home, the house Julian and I paid off together over 16 years, should somehow be reduced further to satisfy a claim on money that wasn't legally his to claim. Then I made the mistake of telling Odette, my mother-in-law, what was happening. I thought she'd be as blindsided as I was. I thought we could be united in this, two grieving women trying to protect what Julian's actual family had built. Instead, Odette went quiet on the phone in a way that made my stomach drop before she even said a word. Marisol, she finally said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. She knew. She had known for years. Julian had told her about Theo not long after he was born, swearing her to secrecy, and she had kept that secret through birthdays, holidays, and every single dinner where she looked me in the eye and asked how my children were doing, knowing the whole time there was a third grandchild she'd apparently met, more than once, at a diner 2 towns over where nobody would recognize them. I told him he needed to tell you, she said, like that absolved her. I told him for years, but it wasn't my secret to tell, Marisol. I couldn't betray my son like that. I asked her the only question that mattered to me in that moment. And what about betraying me? She didn't have an answer for that. What she did have, a few days later, was an opinion, which she shared freely with the rest of the family, that I was being cold and vindictive for pushing back on Theo's inheritance claim, that the boy had already lost the only father he had, and that fighting his mother in court would make me look exactly like the kind of woman who cared more about money than about a grieving child. Suddenly, I wasn't the widow anymore. I was the obstacle. Julian's sister stopped returning my texts. 2 of our closest friends as a couple, people I'd known for over a decade, started sending me careful, distant messages about how complicated this all must be for everyone involved. A phrase that conveniently erased the fact that only one person in this story had lied for 16 years, and it wasn't me, and it wasn't my children, and it wasn't even, really, Theo. I sat in my kitchen one night, after Camila and Adrian had gone to bed, and realized I was being asked to grieve my husband, defend my children's future, manage a legal battle against a stranger's attorney, and absorb blame from my own extended family, all at the same time, while everyone kept reminding me to think of the innocent child in all of this, as if I had somehow forgotten that Theo hadn't asked for any of this either. Then things got so much worse. It happened almost a month after the funeral, during what should have been a simple, procedural meeting. Priscilla had arranged a preliminary conversation between both sides, trying to head off a courtroom fight before it started, to see if there was any room for a reasonable settlement everyone could live with. I agreed to it because I genuinely wanted this handled with as little cruelty as possible, for Theo's sake as much as my own children's. Renata came to that meeting, and she brought Theo with her. I want to be clear, nobody told me he'd be there. I walked into that conference room expecting lawyers and paperwork, and instead I was looking at a 9-year-old boy sitting quietly in a chair too big for him, holding a backpack with a cartoon dinosaur on it. And for one disorienting second, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing, because he had Julian's exact eyes. Not similar, exact. The same slight downward tilt at the corners that Adrian has. The same eyes I fell in love with 20 years ago, looking back at me from a child I'd never met, in a room where we were all supposed to be negotiating how much of my late husband's money this boy deserved. Renata later told me, almost defensively, that she'd brought him because her sitter had canceled last minute, and I do believe that part was true. But Grant Pellerin clearly saw an opportunity, because before the meeting properly started, he made a point, loudly enough for everyone to hear, of asking Theo, in front of the whole room, whether he missed his father. That was the moment I understood exactly what kind of fight this had become. This wasn't about a grieving mother trying to secure her son's future anymore, if it had ever really been only that. This was theater, designed to make me look like the villain in front of my own lawyer, in front of Julian's own mother, who had insisted on attending for the family. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, though I wanted to do both. I said, quietly, "This meeting is not a place for a child," and I asked that Theo be taken to the waiting room before we continued. Odette actually scoffed at me. Scoffed. At a moment when a 9-year-old boy was sitting 3 feet away from the woman who'd just found out her husband had a secret family. After Theo left the room, things escalated fast. Grant argued that Julian's 9 years of consistent financial support proved a pattern of paternal commitment that should entitle Theo to a larger share than state minimums, essentially trying to argue that quietly, secretly supporting a child for 9 years should be legally rewarded above and beyond what the law already required. My lawyer pushed back hard, pointing out that Julian's private choices didn't override the rights of the children he'd actually raised in his home, the children who'd lost their father just as completely as Theo had, and who now had to lose part of their financial security too. Odette, sitting there in that same meeting, turned to me during a break and said the sentence, "I don't think I will ever fully forgive her for. Julian would be ashamed of how hard you're fighting this." I looked at my mother-in-law, a woman who had kept a 9-year-old secret from me through birthdays and holidays and every single family dinner, who had met her secret grandson at diners while pretending she only had 2 grandchildren, and I said, "Julian isn't here to be ashamed of anything, Odette. You are the one who should be ashamed. You had years to tell me the truth, and instead you let me find out from a shoebox in a closet." She didn't say anything after that. Nobody did. That night, I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for almost 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I wasn't crying about the money anymore. Not really. I was sitting with the fact that the man I'd built an entire life with had let his own mother lie to my face for 9 years, and that even now, weeks after his death, I was somehow the one being asked to be gracious about it. That was the night something shifted in me. I stopped trying to make everyone comfortable. I called Priscilla the next morning and told her I was done trying to settle this quietly behind closed doors. Done absorbing blame designed to make me feel guilty for protecting my own children. I told her I wanted this handled properly, formally, through the courts, with everything documented, and I wanted one specific thing addressed head-on: Odette's knowledge of Theo's existence for 9 years, and what that meant for any claim that Julian's family had acted in good faith. Priscilla looked into it and found something I hadn't expected. Because Odette had known about Theo for years and had, in fact, occasionally provided cash gifts to Renata for the boy, there was a paper trail, small but real, that suggested a pattern of the extended family knowingly and quietly supporting a hidden household while I remained completely in the dark. It wasn't enough to change Theo's legal inheritance rights, which were his regardless of anyone's honesty or dishonesty, but it was enough to completely dismantle Grant Pellerin's argument that Julian's family had ever acted with anything resembling transparency or good faith. And it was enough, finally, to make Odette's public comments about my coldness look exactly as hollow as they actually were. I decided I wasn't going to let this play out through more secretive side meetings and pressure campaigns disguised as concern for a child. If everyone wanted to have opinions about how I was handling this, they were going to have those opinions in the open, on the record, where the truth could actually speak for itself, instead of being managed and spun by whoever got to whisper in Odette's ear first. I told Priscilla I wanted the formal reading of the will and the mediation session combined into one meeting, with everyone present: Renata, Grant Pellerin, Odette, Julian's sister, who'd been so carefully distant this whole time. I wanted them all in the same room, at the same time, when the actual numbers, the actual documents, and the actual history came out. No more separate conversations where people could quietly agree on which version of me to believe. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning, in a conference room at Priscilla's office. I remember exactly what I wore: a plain navy dress, nothing dramatic, because I didn't want this to look like a performance. I wanted it to look like exactly what it was: a woman showing up to protect her children with the truth, and nothing else. Renata arrived without Theo this time, which I was grateful for, whatever her reasons. Grant Pellerin walked in with the confident energy of a man who assumed this was still going to be a negotiation he could win through pressure. Odette arrived last, sitting as far from me as the room allowed, which told me she already knew, somehow, that this wasn't going to go the way she'd hoped. Priscilla opened by reading the actual terms of Julian's estate, plainly, without editorializing: the house, the rental property, the savings. The specifics of what state law required regarding Theo's share, once paternity was formally established through the documentation Renata had already provided. It was exactly as I expected, less than Grant had been demanding, but a real, legitimate amount that Theo was absolutely entitled to. Then I asked to speak. I looked at Grant Pellerin first. I told him, calmly, that I had never once disputed Theo's legal right to inherit what the law said he deserved, and that anyone in that room who'd been told otherwise had been misinformed, likely deliberately. I said I'd spent the last month being painted as a woman fighting to cheat a grieving child, when in fact I had been fighting exactly one thing: attempts to take more than the law required, dressed up as compassion. Then I turned to Odette. "You told me Julian would be ashamed of how hard I'm fighting this," I said. "I want you to understand something clearly, in front of everyone in this room. I am not fighting Theo. I have never fought Theo. He is 9 years old, and none of this is his fault, and he will get exactly what he is legally owed, today, without a single objection from me. What I am fighting is the idea that I should feel guilty for finding out my husband had an entire hidden life, while the people who are supposed to be my family knew about it the entire time and let me walk around for 9 years thinking I understood my own marriage." The room went completely silent. Even Grant Pellerin didn't say anything. I kept going, because I'd waited a month to say this. Julian isn't here to explain himself. He isn't here to apologize to me, or to Renata, or to Theo, for waiting until it was too late to tell the truth himself. But you are here, Odette. You had 9 years. You had birthdays, and Christmases, and every single Sunday dinner where you asked about my children like you only had 2 grandchildren to ask about. You don't get to call me cold for wanting the truth handled honestly. You had your chance to handle it honestly, and you chose to protect a secret instead of protecting me." Odette started to cry. I didn't feel triumphant about it, exactly. I just felt, for the first time in a month, like the truth was finally sitting in the room instead of hiding in a closet. Renata, quietly, said something I didn't expect. She said, "For what it's worth, I never wanted it to be like this either. I told Julian for years he needed to tell you himself. This isn't the way any of us wanted Theo to find out how complicated his family really is." I believed her. I still believe her. We finalized the settlement that day, essentially exactly along the lines the law required, no more, no less. Theo would receive his legal share, held in trust until he was older, managed by Renata with financial oversight built in. My children's home stayed intact. The rental property was sold, and the proceeds split according to what the law actually required, not what Grant Pellerin had tried to inflate it into. It's been a little over 2 months now since Julian died. Life looks different in ways I'm still adjusting to. Camila asked me, a few weeks ago, if she has a brother she's never met, and I told her the truth, as gently and honestly as I could, because I decided a long time ago in that closet that I was done with secrets in this family, even the ones that might feel easier in the short term. She sat with it for a while, and then asked if she'd ever get to meet him someday. I told her that would be up to her, when she's older, if she wants that. I'm not going to force a relationship none of these kids asked for, but I'm also not going to be the reason it never has the chance to exist. Adrian doesn't fully understand it yet, and I'm in no hurry to explain more than a 10-year-old needs to carry. As for Odette, we haven't spoken since that meeting. She's tried calling a few times. I haven't answered. Maybe someday I will. Right now, I need distance from the version of family that thinks loyalty means silence, even when silence costs someone else 9 years of the truth. Renata and I email occasionally, mostly logistics about the trust, nothing more. And honestly, I think that's exactly where that relationship should live. Not friends, not enemies. Just 2 women who loved the same complicated, flawed man, doing our best now to make sure 2 innocent kids don't inherit our mess along with whatever money is left. I don't know if what I did was entirely right. I know I didn't fight Theo's inheritance, because he never asked to be born into a secret, and punishing him for his father's cowardice never sat right with me, no matter how angry I was. But I also know I wasn't going to let guilt, manufactured by people who kept this from me for years, turn into a bigger inheritance than the law ever intended, at the expense of the 2 kids who actually grew up in that house, calling Julian Dad every single day of their lives. So here's my question for you. If you found out your spouse's family had known a life-altering secret for years and chosen silence over honesty, would you ever be able to let them back into your life the way they were before? Or does a betrayal like that permanently change what family even means to you? If this story got under your skin the way it got under mine, tell me in the comments. Like this video if you believe honesty should have come long before any lawyer got involved. And share it with someone who needs to hear that protecting your children doesn't make you the villain, even when everyone around you is trying to convince you otherwise. Come back tomorrow, because I have another story for you. One about a woman who discovered her wedding day wasn't the first time her fiancé had walked down that same aisle.